Welcome in to Daily Faceoff Live, your go-to source for everything hockey. Live every weekday at noon Eastern.
Welcome in a January 18th edition of Daily Faceoff Live. Tyler Yaremchuk and Mike McKenna with you for 30 minutes of straight hockey talk. Mike, how are you? How'd you enjoy the games last night?
Well, I enjoyed them immensely, and we got a couple of them on the docket here we're going to talk about, but I thought it was a pretty entertaining night across the board and just enjoying a nice rainy day here in the middle of the United States. Hope you're doing well, Tyler.
Yes, I am. And yeah, a lot of great hockey games played last night, yet that is not the dominant storyline from the NHL. So let's throw 2 minutes and 30 seconds up on the clock and start with Ivan Provorov. Last night was the Pride night for the Philadelphia Flyers, and before puck drop, there was a lot of talk that, wow, Ivan Provorov's being healthy scratched. He's not on the ice for warmups for the Philadelphia Flyers. They were wearing their Pride Night jerseys. Ivan Provorov opted not to wear one, so the Flyers said, you can't take warmup. He then still played in the game, and it was our Frank Saravalli who actually broke the story that Provorov was not on the ice for warmups because he did not want to wear the Flyers Pride Night jerseys. And this has stewed up quite the conversation, Mike. Before I get your take on it, let's throw up the NHL statement that they released earlier today about their Hockey is for Everyone initiative in response to this, saying, Hockey is for Everyone is the umbrella initiative under which the league encourages clubs to celebrate the diversity that exists in their respective markets. The statement goes on to add that clubs decide whom to celebrate, when and how, with league counsel and support. Players are free to decide which initiatives to support, and we continue to encourage their voices and perspectives on social and cultural issues. So a fairly middle-of-the-road stance from the NHL when it comes to this, Mike, and I suppose they're just taking the route of, hey, we can't condemn a player for wanting to not support this. What are your thoughts on what played out and what happened with Provorov?
Well, to me, this is just a simple case of a player that, in his eyes, he's not standing up. I think he's probably had enough when it comes to Pride nights and other things that go directly against his religion. Provorov's from the Russian Orthodox Church, and that church has officially condemned homosexual relations and their problems of bioethics sections of teachings. Okay, they denounce any propaganda of homosexuality, and that's I can't think of any other way that would be taken if you're Provorov, of wearing a Pride jersey as being propaganda in the eyes of his church. So, listen, this is happening in America, North America, where freedom of religion is a real thing and players have a right to choose to do what they want. But that doesn't keep the player from facing ramifications. If you're Provorov, what team at this point is going to want to deal with the headache of now facing a backlash from a certain section of a fan base, which to me is rightful. I wouldn't want to support a player who openly doesn't, in my eyes, even though he said he respects people of that, LGBTQ people, that doesn't jive with me at all. That's not a respect. Okay. So where do we go with it? I think the NHL at this point has just always said they're going to support the players to make the right decision that they believe in their eyes. They're going to let them choose that. Personally, I don't think the Flyers should have sat him out of the game. I think that the consumers and the fans of the Flyers can make the decision on who they choose to support. And then the Flyers are going to have to make a decision on what they want to do with the player based on that.
Yeah, freedom of choice, in my eyes, is not freedom of consequence with that. And I think it's just a bit of a cop-out for him to say that it goes against his religion. To me, you are representing the organization at that point when you put on the jersey and go out there. And, I won't get too far into how I feel about all this. If you really want to see how I feel, you can go to my Twitter account. But what I'll add is I just feel bad that on a night that's supposed to support inclusivity and show that hockey is for everyone, this is the turn and this is the dialogue we're having now. And I feel for a gay Flyers fan who goes there last night, excited to see their organization, celebrate them and say, hey, you are a part of this organization. We support you. We're including you. and this becomes the topic. I feel bad that this is where it had to go, and it's disappointing to see that Ivan Provorov, disappointing to put it lightly, that Ivan Provorov decided to take this route. We take a rather hard transition out of that topic and go to, as we said off the top, some exciting moments on the ice last night, including the Toronto Maple Leafs picking up another impressive victory. The other side of that coin is, man, the Florida Panthers. I mean, if they weren't toast before, they're toast now. With your life on the line night in, night out, you can't be blowing leads. But the Leafs storm back, and it was thanks to 2 goals from William Nylander, who ends the night with 3 points. He snaps out of a 6-game goalless drought as well. Now he's up to 24 goals on the season. Mike, this guy, in a season where Austin Matthews has kind of had a down year production-wise, Nylander stepped up and said, don't worry, 34, I got you covered.
Well, and that's why the Maple Leafs are just rolling, because it's not just Matthews, Tavares, Marner. I mean, Nylander's really hit another level this season. I still think he has a good chance at scoring 40 goals and putting up 90 points. And, last night was one of those classic Nylander moments where he picks the game up and goes. Like, he missed a penalty shot earlier in the game, but he manages to score one off his noggin. Okay, the puck basically hits him in the head and goes in, but it's like, okay, I'm back. Then he takes over in overtime and wins it with a nice move around Bobrovsky to his forehand. I saw his last game winner in overtime here in St. Louis, and I just kind of wonder about it. Like, what's Nylander's next contract going to look like? Like, if you ask me, this guy's probably going to have to set the bar at $9 million and go up from there. That's like, he's probably not going to get Rantanen or Kachuk money, but you look at that Philip Forsberg deal at 8.5. If Nylander's put up 90 points and he scores 40, he's got to be in that range. So the depth of the Leafs, and I wouldn't even call it depth with Nylander, but the strength of that forward core and lineup really came through. Murray stopped 4 of 8 last night, and Sheldon Keefe ends up pulling him for Samsonov just to get a change. And dude, if you're Florida, think about this, Tyler. They allowed 7 power plays for the Maple Leafs. Like, how tired you get. They allowed 2 power play goals, but you also lose all your energy. It was just a microcosm of the two teams. Toronto's determined. Florida's going nowhere.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I love the Nylander contract discussion because he is eligible for an extension coming up here with only 1 more season after this one left on his deal. And I think we all remember how much difficulty those two sides had coming to an agreement on his last deal. And if you're Nylander, you've scored more goals than Matthews, and you only have 4 less points than Mitch Marner. How do you not sit there and look at Matthews' $11.6 million AAV and Mitch Marner's $10.9 million AAV when it's time to negotiate your new deal? How do you not sit there and go, I'm worth what those guys are getting because I can drive offense just as well as those guys? And this year has been a prime example of that. Like you mentioned, 8.5. Remember, by the time this contract's up, if he walks it to UFA, we could get a cap increase of $4 million this summer, maybe another 4 after that. I think he might be a $10, $11 million guy by the time he's a UFA.
No, there's no question. Like I say, you started at 9 and you go up from there. It's all going to matter whether the Leafs are going to be able to keep him or not, because open market, yeah, I think you might be looking at 9.5 or 10 for Nylander.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see how that plays out, or even if the Leafs this summer, I mean, if they might have a tough decision to make. If they're like, man, we might not be able to re-sign this guy coming up in a year. Let's head out west and take a look at tonight's NHL slate, where there is a big matchup down in Calgary between the Flames and the Colorado Avalanche. Both these sides, they need a big win pretty bad. You look at Calgary, they're hanging on to the last wild card spot, but if you sort by points percentage, they are just barely hanging on to that last wild card spot because Colorado is nipping at their heels. 4 points back with 3 games in hand. This is basically a must-win game for each team here now that we're in the back half of the season. I'll start with Colorado, Mike. They've had injuries. They've been really banged up this season. That is part of the reason, the goals for per game probably isn't as high as they want and why they're sitting on the outside of a playoff spot. Their power play, which was lights out last season, has struggled or hasn't been as dominant, I should say, so far this year. But at some point, it gets late, and it's getting late early for the Avalanche. Remember last year with the Golden Knights, everyone just kept saying at this point in the season, well, don't worry, they'll get healthy, and then they'll go on a run. They're good enough to go on a run, and that run just never really came. There's going to come a point here for the Avs where, man, just saying, we'll win 10 in a row at some point. That can't keep being the thing to point at.
No, it kind of reminds me of Back to the Future 3 when they're on the train and they reach the point of no return, where they got to go to the future or else they're going to go right off the cliff. And, for the Avs, that point's coming here really quickly. They're 4 points out of the second wild card slot in the West. And guess who has that? The Calgary Flames. And for me, the Flames have an easier second half than Colorado does in terms of the strength of who they're playing against. And Colorado, I mean, they haven't been able to really string it together this year, again, because of those injuries. But they need things to happen now. Like, they can't wait for Landeskog, Manson, Byram to get back in the lineup. They're going to have to put up 50 points in the remaining 40 games to even have a thought about making playoffs. So that's a tall hill to climb, especially when you've got Calgary right ahead of you. And you look at the swing with this game potentially. Calgary's got 51 points. You got Calgary with 47. Calgary wins the game. They're 6 points ahead, but there are games in hand for Colorado. So, I mean, for me, I think it's probably heavier on Colorado with tonight's game. They really need to be able to start racking up points. And, Calgary's been pretty mid all season. You keep waiting for them to take off. Well, neither of these teams can really guarantee it, but I would say the Avalanche has a better chance of it. But dude, if they don't win some games in the next couple of weeks here throughout, even through mid-February, it's going to end up being too late for Colorado before you know it.
Yeah, it's pretty wild to look at the wild card standings in the Western Conference and see Edmonton, Calgary, Colorado, 3 of the final 4 teams standing in the Western Conference last season, and it's looking likely that one of them could miss the Stanley Cup playoffs this season. The Calgary Flames obviously went through so much change this offseason, and it just hasn't quite been clicking the same way it was for them last season when they won the Pacific Division. Let's get into our daily deadline countdown, which is up at dailyfaceoff.com. Our guy Frank Saravalli taking a look at another Pacific Division team. Well, more specifically, one of the decisions they have to make. The Vancouver Canucks and Andrei Kuzmenko. They won the sweepstakes this offseason for the Russian winger, and boy, has it ever paid off for them. Almost a point per game player, a guy who on his ELC is more or less matching what JT Miller is doing. Well, actually, no, he is exactly matching what JT Miller's doing, and JT Miller got a nice big extension earlier this season. It's a fascinating look, and quite frankly, could show their decision with Kuzmenko the real direction that they're going to take this thing, because he is still, he's middle-aged, 25, middle-aged in terms of NHL, that is. He's put up a ton of points, but he's not exactly a play driver. And if this guy wants a big extension, I wonder if the Canucks, well, if they want to give it to him or if they can even afford to give it to him. Mike, should the Canucks look to keep this guy in the fold going forward, look at an extension, or should they sit there and say, hey, he was kind of found money. Now let's move on from him, get a second-round pick, get a prospect, get whatever, cut our losses now, but get an asset in return?
I think it all depends on the comfortability of term. And if I'm Patrick Alvin, because he's the general manager, not Jim Rutherford, I wouldn't want to go more than 1 year with Kuzmenko, because you look at how desperately the Canucks have wanted to shed cap space. Can they really tie themselves up to a property in Kuzmenko that they're still unsure of what that player could be, especially, like you say, like, he's very opportunistic in how he scores. He's not a big driver with the puck. He can finish. I mean, he's going to probably score 30 goals this year. So, if you can get him at 1 year, maybe a $7 million deal, does that work if you're Vancouver? I would say absolutely. But if you go any longer in that with term, it seems counterintuitive to what Rutherford and crew is trying to do, and that's free up cap space and not get committed to long-term contracts on questionable players, because you just don't know. So it's a tough call. If they're not going to go long-term, I think you have to move them, because to me, Kuzmenko, you're probably going to be 4 years, 5.5. I don't know. Maybe he gets a little bit higher than that on the open market for longer term. But don't you think Vancouver's going to have to make that decision, Tyler? That's just purely what they're comfortable with and how long they want to keep him for?
Yeah, I think that's kind of step one of the decision. But step two would be, what can you get for this guy? Because look at the numbers this year again, 38 points in 42 games, and he's on that $950,000 contract. That's valuable to a contender. If you're willing to eat half of that, if you're the Canucks, every team in the league should, or every contender in the league should hypothetically be making you an offer for this guy. He's a good net front presence. He can produce. He could give any team an offensive spark, and he'll be dirt cheap. So I think you owe it to yourselves, if you're the Canucks, to at least look around and see what you can get. And I wouldn't be surprised if there are some pretty good offers rolling in for a guy who is scoring a lot and is on a dirt cheap contract. He will hold a ton of value ahead of the deadline. Certainly one of the situations we're keeping an eye on as we, in the weeks leading up to the NHL trade deadline. Let's switch gears once again, get to our big segment this week. It's the next wave with Steven Ellis. Steven Ellis is our guy associate editor and our prospect analyst at dailyfaceoff.com. And the next wave is brought to you by Montana's. Steven Ellis, the Calder Trophy. We're just past the halfway point so far this season. We've looked at a bunch of awards so far throughout this week, now that we're kind of heading into the back half of the season. What's your stance on the Calder? Is it still Matty Beniers to lose?
I think so. I think Beniers is still the number one guy. He's been the one that's been leading the scoring for rookies all year long. You look at how good Seattle's been as a group, and I think this is someone who is going to be a future star. Well, not a future star, but he's going to be a long-term star for this team. He's the first kind of real star prospect they got. But I think Mason McTavish is really in the fight here now, too. I think he kind of had a slow start to the season, and heading into the World Junior Camp, it's like, maybe it's best he actually goes there because he wasn't scoring a lot. But the one guy I'm also really a big fan of right now is Logan Thompson. And I don't think his stats right now are not as good as they were, I'd say, a month and a half, 2 months ago. But this is a guy that was a rookie who came in, had to take the starting role for a team that desperately needed another shot in the arm here without Robin Lehner. And I think that goalies don't get enough love when it comes to the Calder race. But you look at the numbers that he's been able to put up, 40 wins is a potential here. And I think that's a huge bonus for a team that just kind of, a lot of people wrote off, thought they weren't going to be playoff material, and instead they could win the division.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, they've got a tough go with some of the injuries that have taken place in Vegas. If they can get healthy and start winning again, man, people really do. They vote based on wins. I remember Steve Mason winning the Calder back with the Columbus Blue Jackets under Ken Hitchcock, kind of a similar scenario. On Monday, I saw that you were at the BioSteel All-American Prospect game. Any players there that stood out to you, Steven?
Well, first off, if any of you saw my tweet about it, where I was sitting right behind basically these blinds, so I couldn't see the whole neutral zone of the ice, which was kind of fun. But yeah, going out there for Plymouth was great. And the one guy I really wanted to see was Will Smith. And I'm going to have an article about him later today about how he's one of the smartest two-way players in this draft. And, he's been putting up, he's close to 60 points overall with the U.S. development team this year. He'll be the guy I think a lot of people are really zoning in on at the U18 World Championship in a few months. But he was the MVP of that game. And I know a lot of people, myself included, looked at that first period and said, man, this guy was not doing a lot. But he went out there and was fantastic in the second half and, again, deserved the MVP. One name I'm definitely keeping an eye on right now is Jacob Fowler, a goaltender who not a lot of people were talking about him kind of heading into the season, but he plays so much bigger than a guy who's listed at 6'2". He moves very well, a very good glove hand. He was excellent at the World Junior A Challenge, so he's another guy that I think could be one to watch as a maybe 5th, 6th goalie drafted this year. And then Oliver Moore, another one who going and seeing what he was doing away from the U.S. National Development Program, because it's most of those players played on one team, and then the other team was more USHL focused. And he was on the USHL team, which in theory was a weaker team. And he carried them. He scored the first goal. And, there's an argument to be made he could end up becoming the best player on this development program. Doesn't get as many points as some of the other guys, but I think if you need a guy who can just kind of do it all and put a lot of points on the board, Oliver Moore is going to be a star in the NHL one day.
Steven, you mentioned Jacob Fowler, a goaltender, and last year in the draft, we didn't have our first goalie taken until 41st overall. What's the crop like in the 2023 class? Will we see a goalie go in the first round?
I think with this year's draft, there might be like 40 really good skaters. And then goaltending, I think it's kind of up in the air. There's Mike Harabel out in the USHL is one to watch. There's a couple guys out in the Western League. But I don't think we're going to see a guy in the first round, but I do think we're going to see a lot in the second and third round. The name I've been watching all year long closely is Trey Augustine, who was in that top prospect game, and he was USA's World Junior starter, which I projected was going to be the case, but a lot of 17-year-olds don't start for the United States at the World Juniors. But I thought this is someone who, not a big goalie. He says he likes to look up to UC Saros, which is very common by a lot of smaller goalies, obviously, because he is one of the smaller ones. But it's someone who I think could be a starter in the NHL, and it'd be great if he could grow a little bit. But so there's some decent goalie options. I don't know if we got any starting goalie options, though.
Fair enough. Always appreciate your time on the next wave, Steven. It's brought to you by Montana's, their daily deals. They're bringing back the viewing party this year. And tonight, It's all you can eat ribs over at Montana's. So check out montanas.ca. They also have a brand new comfort menu out, which I was taking a look at the other day, and it looks fantastic. Steven Ellis, I know you're a bit of a foodie. You could probably go put back some all you can eat ribs tonight.
Absolutely.
There you go. Thanks for your time, Steven. Chat with you next week, man.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Continuing along with the show, it's our inbox question. You can send them in on Twitter, hashtag AskDFO, or you can always drop one in to our YouTube chat as well. Mike, I asked Steven for his mid-season awards pick for the Calder, so it's only fair to throw a Vezina question your way. Linus Ullmark was crowned our winner at our Daily Faceoff mid-season awards, but the question for you is, could anyone catch him?
I think so. And what I base that off of is the fact that Linus Ullmark and the Bruins, they really haven't faced much adversity yet this year, and it happens to every team at some point. Ullmark's record, he's 23-2-1 with a .936 save percentage. That's otherworldly. It's going to regress at some point. I would keep an eye on Connor Hellebuck. He's been huge for the Jets. Didn't have his best game last night in Montreal. But the two that I think really have the best chance, Ilya Sorokin and Jussi Saros. If Saros can will the Predators into the playoffs, I think he has to take consideration. He's been unbelievable the past couple months, and Sorokin has the entire year. So I do think there's a chance for Ullmark to be dethroned, but right now it's going to take some big-time adversity for the Bruins for that to happen.
I wonder how much more love Sorokin could get if the Islanders make the playoffs. Because, I mean, you look at the numbers he's putting up, even though the team's not winning right now, and I know we talked about this yesterday, but I almost think, like Shesterkin last year, if the Islanders make the playoffs, Sorokin should not only be a Vezina candidate, but probably a Hart candidate as well, no?
Oh, I mean, he's allowed one goal in 5 of his last 11 games, and he only won 4 of those games. That shows you where the Islanders are at.
Yeah, no kidding. Let's move along to our daily face-off Pointsbet daily bets, and an interesting slate tonight. I know there was someone in the chat. Kyler is hammering the underdog Colorado Avalanche in Calgary tonight. Not a terrible spot at all, but I have a couple of other plays lined up for tonight. So let's dig into it, courtesy of our friends at Pointsbet Canada. The Dallas Stars taking on the San Jose Sharks. And honestly, I can't really believe where this line is set once again. Maybe it's a bit of a trap. Maybe I'm being fooled. But the Dallas Stars are one of the top teams in the Western Conference, one of the top teams in the league. They're 6-3 in their last 10 games. The Sharks have only won 2 of their last 10. I should not be getting plus 165 on the money line. On the puck line. I love this spot, and I am hammering that Dallas minus 1.5 bet. And also no shot prop parlay. There was just not enough on the slate that I really liked. In fact, the only shot prop I do like this evening is Michael Backlund in Calgary. He had nailed this in 6 in a row, and then he finally missed it in their last game. I like him to bounce back. Minus 140 is a good spot. This guy has been remarkably consistent when it comes to hitting this bet so far throughout the course of the season. So I like going Backlund over 2.5 and taking Dallas to beat the San Jose Sharks. And with that, Mike, I will throw it over to you for a little garbage time, and a garbage time where you're going to give us an education.
Yeah, I'm going to do my best here, and it's know the rules, man. Like, it's funny for me when this happens. It's like once a week something occurs in the NHL where my eyes bug out of my head, and I go, "Why don't you know this rule?" Now, this is a pretty funny play. Engvall on the Leafs actually knocks the stick forward or back towards Samsonov, his goaltender, to give him a stick. Well, that's a penalty. You can't do that. But then Bo Bennett turns around because it's laying right in his feet, and he shoves it away from Samsonov, and it goes the other direction, and bedlam ensues. Liljegren ends up in the box instead of Engvall. So, I mean, it was kind of a calamity of errors here, but it still shows the point that there's at least 2 players on the ice here that just flat out either didn't know or ignored the rules. Engvall trying to shoot the stick back to his goalie, and Bennett trying to shoot it out of the way. Like, I thought everybody knew this in Pee-wees. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe they got caught up in the heat of the moment. But the rulebook is free online, Tyler. Anybody can download it. If you can read, it helps, because every single week, man, stuff happens and I can't believe it. And it's so clearly laid out in the rules. Like, I'm wondering if teams don't start to have an open book exam on the rule book to start the season for their players so they don't get caught with stupid avoidable penalties.
Yeah, okay, so is there a way, that'll be my question, is there a way to legally return a goalie stick to a goalie?
So you can hand the stick to the goaltender, but you can't play with 2 sticks in your hands at a time. So yes, there is a way for that goaltender to have his stick retrieved for him, but it's not by shooting it to him.
All right, I like it. I like it. Professor McKenna checking in and giving us a little lesson on the NHL rulebook. Maybe these teams should just hire you, and you can give these goalies and players a crash course on what to do and what not to do. Fantastic edition of the show. Big shout out to Mike for all the insight and analysis, and to Steven Ellis as well, who is around for the next wave. That is going to be a wrap on today's show. We'll be back tomorrow, you know it, noon Eastern time, to give you another 30 minutes of straight hockey talk. In the meantime, keep it locked on dailyfaceoff.com, and we'll chat tomorrow.
Thanks for tuning in to Daily Face-Off Live. Make sure you hit the subscribe button to